I'm currently editing or finishing off an edit that I started this time last year. I met with a lovely chap called Dave Pulteney. He's a vicar up in Bedworth, and we had a really good conversation. It lasted 2 hours, all about Soul Survivor. He was a trustee for Soul Survivor. He also was employed, and so he knew the whole stuff quite a lot. And I've forgotten how I got in touch with him initially, but he wanted to speak with me, perhaps even a year before that. But he started, I think, being counselled, and it affected him massively. And sort of, he put me off. Maybe even took a sabbatical and put me off for some time. Anyway, we met and spoke for, as I said, a while. I cut it down to about 25 minutes and shared it with him. And this time last year, he and others were hugely scared about the repercussions of speaking out about Soul Survivor. And I had no idea why. And, well, I had a bit of an idea. And what interests me now, and I spoke with him a few weeks ago and said, Dave, I would love to just put this on YouTube. I think it's a really important conversation to share. And I think this is perhaps for a few of you to watch. I'm not sure everyone will want to watch this, but if you're involved in leadership in the church, if you're involved in youth work, if you've been hurt, I think this conversation will really support you. I'm still really angry about what Pilavachi did to a number of people. For me, it was quite hurtful. It was, but the conversations I had afterwards were heartbreaking. So many people have been hurt by him and the environment that he created to serve him. And since then, the silence and the silencing of institutions, whether it's New Wine that we speak about, whether it's the chair of trustees, which was Graham Cray, whether it's others that sort of spoke out enough to have ticked a box but not fulfilled their function, should be making us angry still. And I'm here waving this flag for those of the people I spoke with, those of the people that didn't want to speak with me, and for people in environments that the church successfully silences through time. Why is it that no one's talking about this anymore? Why? Because it's not fashionable or cool. There's no money in it anymore for the media. Premier did their half-baked podcast with the person that ran it, I don't know, leaving halfway through. New Wine have gone quiet over it. The Church of England certainly have. There's no justice to be had here, but what interests me is there's more to it than this. It could easily be replicated if we don't understand what got us there in the first place. With this growth in churches in Britain, it's exciting and it's great news. But if I was involved in church leadership, I'd be thinking, where's the blueprint that works? QED. And we need to be challenging this stuff still. So for me, this is a conversation that is hopefully a process of healing, if you find that way, and let me know. But it's also a way to interrogate and potentially call people to account. So I'm still on the lookout, and if you want to be involved in making something, this interview was essentially going to be part of the film I was hoping to make, which is taking yonks now, 2 years? And that's not down to me being slow or not pushing, it's down to people just not responding. I text someone today and on WhatsApp, and the blue ticks aren't there. 2 ticks are. They haven't responded, and they won't. And the amount of people, the leader of New Wine, did email me back after about 2 or 3 months saying that he's too busy to give interviews like this with his work with New Wine. And I said, well, that's a shame, because there's a lot of negativity about your organisation. And I'm not wanting to start fights, but I am wanting to search for the truth. And if that happens, then so be it. Thanks ever so much for watching previous videos. Please subscribe to this channel, because it's going to be something that I continue and I'm doing in between my paid work and other projects. Let me know what you think of this. But Dave has been incredibly vulnerable. I asked him if he was cool with me putting it on like this, and he said yes. Bless him. I think he even a year ago he was still quite hurt, and also quite worried. And so maybe hear some of the tone from that. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you think. I've cut it, not removing anything significant, but it was a 2-hour chat, and I thought half an hour is still enough. So yeah, here's my intro to it. Please watch it, and please engage, comment, like, subscribe. Thank you.
It's really like it's really risky. You know, actually, risky. Just having this conversation, recording it.
For you?
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey, how are you doing? All right.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you too.
How you doing?
Yeah, good. Do you want to have a quick look around?
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's a great space, really.
Right in the middle of town.
Right in the middle of town, which is brilliant. Doctor's surgery, police station, civic hall on one side.
Yeah.
The shops and
Wetherspoons.
Yeah, Wetherspoons and Greg's. Probably that's important. We spend a lot of time in Greg's. So yeah.
Great.
So welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Here we go.
Yeah, great.
So I mean, obviously this is set up for youth on Sundays at the moment.
Yeah.
But
could bring a couple of chairs in.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking downstairs. Bring a couple of chairs and probably just use these bits. And people are all over the place with it.
Yeah.
From some people that that are on staff at the same time really struggling because the way they look back, they see things differently.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like everyone's all over the place. I remember walking in those doors to what was, I think, an old W.H. Smith warehouse, and seeing the carpet. It just was all gaffer taped, and it was just all a little bit crazy in there. Really wasn't much aesthetic appeal, let's say. But I remember standing there just amongst the people, and they were worshipping, and there was something that was just completely different to everything I'd experienced before. The worship leader, a guy called Matt Redman, just started playing this simple song, "Better is one day in your course than 1,000 days elsewhere," and I felt God just speak really powerfully through that song to me. That promise that better would be one day with Jesus in my life than 1,000 days doing it on my own, really. And that sort of really was my moment, I guess, where that was that realisation that there was a choice to be made, and that God was real. And I remember driving back after that meeting that evening, and I was just going round this roundabout, and I suddenly just discovered I had this revelation: Jesus is real, and that I love him, and that he loves me. And sort of April 2001, I just Mike preached a sermon about what you're doing with your life, where you're going, what's your vision, what's your calling. And I just went forward for prayer, and the person who prayed for me and myself just sensed maybe God was calling me to go and work for Soul Survivor Ministries, and to leave industry and do that transition. So I spoke to the associate pastor, a guy called Bob Ewell, and within a couple of weeks I'd met Liz Bidoff, the executive director, and I was handing my resignation in industry.
After Dave spoke about how essentially he became a Christian after growing up, I suppose, and then speaking about how he got into Soul Survivor, we then just went straight and start talking about Mike Pilavachi. I've chopped it down here, so hence this intro. But really, we were just trying to understand how did it all take shape? How did it come together? And why were people so accepting of it?
We would have a never-ending string of leaders come and endorse Mike, and there's been all sorts of clips of that, those recordings of that. And so maybe Mike, some of the behaviours weren't great. Along would come the leader of the American Vineyard or something and say, "Wow, Mike's amazing," and everything else. And you would think, okay, this just must be me. There's these seasoned, experienced leaders, archbishops, whatever it might be, coming and validating Mike in his ministry, and so therefore at the same time perpetuating that culture that allowed abuse and poor behaviours to happen. And I think the abuse, just aside, is that Mike's abusive nature was, yes, right at the extreme of spiritual abuse, but the sort of the Church of England, we have a sort of a 4-part scale really, from quite low levels of manipulation and control right up to spiritual abuse. And I think there's been examples in the media and chatting to people that fit all those categories at different times and different places. But if you have that, the endorsement, MBEs and awards and all those sorts of things, and the pastor behind all these successful worship pastors that are selling millions of albums and conferences and all the rest of it, then actually there is built in that automatic downplaying of yourself, because you see how God's using this person. Who am I? I just got to suck it up, and it's just clearly just me that's got this wrong. It must be fine. Those that particularly suffered abuse had raised that. They blew the whistle later, but I think at the time that's why people were unheeded. I think Tim and Pete Hughes, for example, say that they tried to bring these concerns and they weren't heeded, because who are we to stop this great thing, Soul Survivor? And I think, but I wonder, I wonder is, if it was called Mike Pilavachi Ministries rather than Soul Survivor, I wonder if some of those sorts of slight subtle shifts would have made a bit of a difference to make us realise that it really was largely at times about Mike and his ministry, and that's what we were there to serve. So I left Soul Survivor in 2007, and then was invited by the chair of trustees to come and be a trustee sort of about 2011 for a few years. I think at first I was like, oh wow, I can come back into the fold again. You sort of miss some of the relationships and the people. We still served at the festival, still believed, because some of the stuff that we saw God do, and we chatted to people about how that Jesus had impacted their lives, was just brilliant. And so you thought, well, okay, I bring a skill set around.
What story would come to mind straight away?
So the first one that springs to mind is I remember praying with a couple of young people for their mate who was deaf, and he miraculously regained his hearing. And I remember taking his hearing aids out and just looking at me going, I can hear. And just like millions of those sort of little stories.
Well, that's not a little story though.
Yeah, but there were lots of those.
Another one then.
Maybe one that a different one. Maybe someone that I knew that had come really broken, had a huge background of abuse, and I just stood with them, and they shared some of what they'd been through, and they cried and wept, and you could just see in the moment, you could see the pain just ebbing away, and love coming in, and Jesus' love, and them being able to receive the fact that they were worthy of love. Because so many people that abuse don't believe that they're worthy of love. That was the Lord at work. I've got no qualms, no doubts about it. I know there's one or two people that said it was all a hoax. It wasn't. I saw the miraculous happen in front of my eyes.
Your role as a trustee, what was expected of you, and what do you think you added within this context of? Because in some respects, the trusteeship, it makes sense within a charity, but within a church, it's less clear maybe. So
there was 3 or 4 key charities.
Yeah.
And so I was a trustee of Soul Survivor Ministries, which was the bit that organised the conferences. So that's where I had the expertise doing the operations and IT and systems for conferences, basically. Had some, not wasn't brilliant, but I had some. And so that's what I sort of brought to the trustee board. The board wasn't about. We didn't ever look at whether Mike was acting in an honourable or right way, or in a godly way, or whether his behaviours and patterns of being were correct. I think if you were a little bit cynical, you could say I was chosen because I was quite a yes person, and hadn't really known anything different by and large, because came to faith at Soul Survivor Watford, worked for Soul Survivor Ministry, etc. So, and probably there's quite a streak of a people pleaser in me, wanting to please people and do what's right rather than ask those difficult questions, really.
Wow, it's amazingly self-aware.
Well, yeah, but people listening would probably watching would probably say, well, how did it take you so long to do that. But I think the thing is, you don't meet regularly as a trustee board. It's only sporadic and intermittent. And you look around and you think that there are other trustees that are personal friends with Mike. It's interesting listening. I watched a documentary that Matt and Beth Redman sort of created, and I think everyone would say that they were surprised because everyone thought that Matt and Beth were Mike's best friends, and so there was this illusion around that maybe quite a few people perpetuated that they were best friends with Mike, and so you left it up to those people to do some of that accountability type stuff. But there was challenge was Mike accountable to the Soul Survivor Ministries? Was he accountable to the trustees of the church? He obviously he was ordained by then, so was he accountable to the bishop? I think actually that ambiguity was just perfect to allow stuff to perpetuate.
When a small charity with a trustee board, you're like, right, you're setting that individual's salary, so you can't speak about that in front of them. You're speaking about whoever just complained about their thing. So that kind of role of a trustee board was very different within the Soul Survivor context to, trusteeships I've been involved in.
Yeah, because, a little bit, the Charity Commission and trustee boards aren't set up to do some of that scrutiny of character and all the that stuff that was needed to be done, really.
Just the P&L.
Yeah, a little bit. Do we think the Lord's calling us to do this? Yes. Well, what will that work? Sort of thing, really. And how's the summer conference looking? Have we got speakers booked in? And are we going to balance the books or those sorts of things? So, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Which is really hard for those that suffered to hear, though, and I think as trustees we need to acknowledge, that actually there probably were more questions we could ask. I realised that wasn't, and ultimately I couldn't do that, and that I left, and I think that's a shame and a pity, but I think that's something that I would love others outside to look more closely into. And because I think we see church plants happening and all sorts of exciting new initiatives happening, and I think the challenge even for the church, even we're chatting about here, how does accountability work in some of our church plants that are going out? Do I really know what's going on there? Do we as a PCC really know what's happening in the church plants or the church regeneration stuff or in some of our schools work? It's not an easy thing to, because if someone wants to manipulate and hide stuff, then it can be very difficult to uncover that. To generate a new way of working, I think will be needed.
So you were involved. I think we sort of start drawing up, and then I'll say what have we missed. But you were involved throughout the kind of noughties and then into the sort of teens. Were you aware of stuff being just off with Mike Pilavachi? Were you aware that other people were aware? So we spoke about Graham Cray, and for me, I'm such a I don't know what the word is, celebrity bunny or something. So I was on Soul Time. Graham Cray did some of the teaching, and then I went to Ridley Hall where he was principal. So because I really valued the way he saw stuff, so his involvement in Soul Survivor really was an endorsement for me that, gosh, there's a bishop involved who talks about theology in a way that I find really interesting. He talks about, I don't know, whatever music.
Contemporary music, and theology of what was going on.
And so he wasn't this kind of saccharine kind of, he just likes, classical music.
Yeah, big goatee.
Like he would talk about Rage Against the Machine or whatever. I don't remember the detail, but he used my language. And then he'd use theological language, and I could read a book about it. I was inspired. So his involvement, and we were involved, and John and Mary pitches, and I remember I was always interested because there was an adventurous thing about them, and for me, travelling and stuff was just fascinating. I was a boy from Romford.
Yeah.
Outside the church to think like that. there are all these different people involved who represented something in me that was way down the path, that endorsed and made sole survivors safe. It wasn't the kind of odd culty thing that we read about in the 9 o'clock service or in the US or Hillsong or whatever. Sole survivor wasn't a cult because it was all these people who were saying it was good. So while you were there, and I don't want to talk about what we think because there's a bunch of people doing that. When you were there, were you aware that you said all these people were endorsing it, whether it was the leader of the Vineyard in the US or whether it was the Archbishop? Were you aware that they had a knowledge, or they were talking with Mike Pilavachi?
No, so I don't know anyone that knew of some of the more serious allegations of abuse that have been talked about in the press and media. I think it's really difficult because we still haven't had a concrete report. Most of those people have chosen to remain anonymous, and I can understand why.
Or quiet.
And or quiet. Maybe just come on to the quiet in a second. So we've got to be careful we don't draw too much from speculation. But what's some of the stuff that has been printed? I didn't know about. I don't know anyone that did know about some of those things. Now, Tim and Pete have gone on record. Hughes have gone on sort of record saying that they did know something and did report it to the chair of trustees, Graham Cray, at the time. But as to what happened and how, that's for them. That's for them to do.
But it didn't come up in one of the trustees.
Oh no.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, no.
Right, because that's where we can speak. So I can speak about my experience when I was 18.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing the kind of
I think. But what we can do is help look back at the culture that meant that it didn't. Why didn't it come up at trustees meetings?
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. So those sorts of things were dealt with away from the formal. Well, thanks for reporting that. I'll have a word with Mike. Or whatever. Actually, but that now we know it just propagates it and allows it to continue. That's not acceptable. So keeping things quiet and not actually making things, putting things up visible is one of those great ways that it all continued.
And and if we are being commentators for a moment, that is one of the central things for this happening over and over and over. Whether it's John Smith or Smythe, whether it's Chris Brain, it must be because it's just deal with that sort of over here.
Well, because we don't want to spoil the reputation of Jesus and his church. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and we can create all sorts of excuses for it, but actually, Jesus is more than capable of looking after church. And you can see, in one sense, some spectators would say that actually this is Jesus actually clearing up his house, and actually that and in one sense I'm very grateful to those that did come forward initially to share their things. So actually this could come out, and many people could actually and go through a lot more healing than they probably realised they needed. I didn't realise I needed the healing that I did. I happened just to be starting counselling at the same time as it all came out, and it was quite a revelation to me actually how much hurt and pain there was in me, and how that had affected how I think about myself and how I am as a parent, as a father, as a husband, how I'd pastor and lead a church. So I'm so grateful that the truth has come out. I think it's what my concern is, and one of the reasons that I said let's have a chat and let's do it on camera, is that perpetuating idea of silence. It can be so easy for denominations or people to parachurch organisations just don't say anything to the press, don't get involved in that. But actually, I feel like I owe it to those that survived the abuse. I owe it to the church to try and air and talk about these things, because I think that actually produces a much more healthy church, rather than us trying to sweep our not so great bits of us under the carpet. Let's expose it to the light and actually although it won't look great, actually it builds confidence that actually we're valuable like everyone else, but actually we're doing something about it.
And we're vulnerable and we need Jesus. It's kind of like what motivates me to do this. I want to see, okay, we have blown it, and I've blown it at times as well, but that's why we're here, because we need, for me it's that basic.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why on earth would you look to protect yourself when God calls us to surrender.
Yeah, but that's this tension of the world again, isn't it? Because that's what business would do. If you're vulnerable, you would seek to minimise that vulnerability in ways. Well, let's keep quiet. Let's etc. And that's just not helpful. So I think it's great, for example, that Saltire Watford have instigated a proper external review into that. New Wine, that they released a very interesting press release that said they really didn't have much involvement with Mike since he left Chorleywood, which just wasn't true in any way, shape or form. I think they realised their mistake there, and they're now investigating how did Mike influence New Wine and what can they learn from it. So I would encourage these people, but as we see, these investigations take a long time. I think as Christians we're really naive. I think I'm really naive. I've had a really pretty sheltered upbringing, compared to a lot of people, and I think we've had the privilege of adopting a great boy, my son, and that process of hearing his story and his life, there's levels of I don't want to reveal too much about him or his story, but there's levels of way we work as humans that the depravity is beyond being us to fathom. And I think probably quite a lot of us Christian leaders are pretty naive, really, if we're honest, because we've lived very sheltered lives and we don't really understand the depravity of humanity, really. And so we naturally try and feel the best of people, and actually without asking some of those more difficult questions. So I think as people look back now, they could say there's lots of markers to suggest that actually that Mike wouldn't be the best person to be left alone with young males or whatever else. But those questions weren't asked because everyone assumes the best. But with that, people have talked about that sense of the control and manipulation, that the ghosting. So people did challenge stuff. They were ghosted and forced out or whatever else. That was, I think most of us experienced that to some degree, and it was quite a good controlling mechanism, really.
Because it took the very thing that you were there for.
Yeah. You want to help and support, and the one person you're trying to help and support, Mike, in this ministry, is suddenly not talking to you because you've not done something right. You adjust your behaviours and patterns to do it right, but as he saw it. So, yeah, I don't know of anyone that didn't have to some degree struggle in their time there. But that's just Mike, and that shrug of the shoulders and that little phrase was so damaging, because it enabled so much abuse to happen and continue to happen for 4 decades, as the Church of England Safeguarding Inquiry sort of said. Very sobering, really. And many great people like yourself came in for a season and went away as confused as you sort of came, really, which is sad. So, and I suppose one of my sadnesses, I suppose, is that, in one sense, Mike's farewell message was pictures of his garden, and maybe alluding to look at the fruit, not at my actions. Look at the fruit of what's happened, and nothing else since then. I think that I feel is sad, because I think it would be really helpful for people to hear something of Mike's reflection now, a year on, as to what he did and how he behaved. I think that would show a level of leadership and maturity that I hope he's journeying towards. So, but we can't make that happen, can we? So that's up to him to to come to that decision, really. Like, you don't want to go searching for that level of notoriety or anything, really.
No. But
it's really like it's really risky. You know,
it's
actually
risky.
Just having this conversation, recording it.
For you? What? For you?
Because you don't because a pre-written something or other, or a few questions that Premier were going to ask me, pre-planned questions that I would answer.
Yeah.
That's fairly controlled.
Yeah, it is.
I've got no idea what I've said, really.
No.
Really, and whether you've got the nuances right, whether you thought about actually some of those people that, actually, because I had a level of leadership at Soul Survivor, I hurt along the way.
I think it is risky, and that's why people don't. But then.
But the silence is worse. It's worse.
It is. And it hurts way more to be silent.
If you've been abused, it hurts way more. The silence hurts way more. Which is one of the things we didn't really say, but we should have probably said. Silence is so hurtful to those that have been abused. That's the whole problem with the safeguarding system, is that everyone reported their things to the national, but there was silence. They haven't released a report. They just said this little statement. Yes, he was abusive. End of. So if you've profited in any way from Soul Survivor, all that we didn't touch on all the ministries that got promoted and got platform and status and grew as a result of Soul Survivor.
Yeah.
It's
huge money.
It's huge money, people have built ministries and lives and all the rest of it.
And influence, because that's the other thing no one understands, that people weren't doing this to line their pockets. I think the worship leaders probably did, but the everyone else had to have influence, to have power, to have all of those sort of a lot softer rewards.
Yeah, and someone like Mike would have never got much traction in the world, but he found within Christianity been a sort of a mini celebrity, basically. His time when he was on site was continually mobbed by young people.
Well, in the Christian world, and especially evangelical, he was a major celebrity.
What will this look? How will people think of us? What will people say about us? How will people judge us? Will it mean I won't get another job somewhere else because do you know what I mean? Like there's all sorts of things, and for you, will truth come out? Will it? Will it actually help in any way, or will it?
Or is I'm
just wasting my day and I'm going to be made to feel an idiot again?
Yeah,
because that's how I was made to feel before.
Yeah, absolutely, worthless.
Yeah,
I tried, but it was worthless.
Yeah. And so many people felt that, but that's not how Jesus sees us.
No.
But it's very human to agree when there's a whole system that's set up to do that.
Yeah.
Worthless people are desperate to find worth.
Yeah.
And when people are desperate, they'll do what you want them to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And kids are the best example of that.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what they want. They want to be wanted.
Yeah. Which is why the staff team at Soul Survivor Ministries was always young.
Yeah.
All the rest of it.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same with being prayed for. You
Totally.
You talk to Mike about your emotions, your feelings, your hurts, your pains, your confusion.
Yeah, we did.
All that sort of stuff, and then that leads on to a bit of wrestling later. Matt Redman talking about how he would talk with Mike and get about his abuse, sexual abuse he'd suffered, and that led on to then Mike wrestling him afterwards. Which it's just horrifying, isn't it?
Yeah. And then past that, not Matt Redman, but what I do know from other people is you would have been that vulnerable with him, he would have been that physical with you, and then when you're vulnerable again, he'd ghost you. And so and within all of that context of wanting to be wanted, and or noticed or having worth. So
Yeah, but you can imagine, can't you? He was, you can imagine things that drove him to, impulses that drove him to wrestling and that physical contact with young men, and then maybe feel bad about it and projected that his sinfulness onto those people. So he didn't want to, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
You could see a whole range of those things really, and so those honest issues around our sexuality and our identity are so important for leaders to raise.
The context of this sort of churchmanship or ecclesiology or theology that it just is so confused about sexuality in its own right, and was certainly in the late 90s.
Yeah,
messy.
Nothing more sure than funerals and weddings and baptisms to keep a vicar busy.
Thanks for staying to the end. Feel free to subscribe and be part of this. Thanks ever so much for your comments and messages and likes and all that sort of stuff. And it demonstrates that it's not just a complete and utter, lonely pursuit, but you're part of this too. Thank you.